I want to share with you today a story I call The Door to Hell. It happened in Portland, Oregon, 1994. But the story goes back way further than that. In the area of southeast Portland, just a hair south of Flavel Street and 52nd, there stood an old historic mansion. It had that semi-Addams Family vibe to it, and it was haunted as hell. Anyway, let me break you down some of the past. It was commissioned by a Union US Civil War veteran. He had it built so his wife, son, and daughters could move in. He became the most prominent dog breeder in the area, and his wife made and sold dolls. Sometime along the way, the old soldier suffered a significant breakdown. He began to abuse and torment his wife and children, but the son got the worst of it. He would beat the boy senseless with his cane, and then lock him in the door to the hell cubbyhole. In the end, the butcher killed his wife, daughters, and then himself. His son had been locked inside that cubbyhole and eventually died to his injuries or starvation. Concerned businessmen were worried when the soldier hadn't come to some meetings of the local Chamber of Commerce, so they sent out some people to investigate when they found a horror show. From 1875 until 1974, the house jumped from owner to owner. All saw the customized large Dutch colonial mansion and wanted it for any number of reasons. All would at some point endure similar supernatural events there. And in 1974, the final owners turned the house over to the local historic society. In 1994, my friend Nick's family bought it from the historical society for quite a steal. When my friends first moved in, we would hear the sounds of dogs barking, yipping and whining in the basement. However, they didn't own a dog. Lights would constantly turn on behind you or off when you walked into a room. Faucets would turn on by themselves, and random objects in locked rooms wouldn't be there where they were left. On many occasions, my friend's family and I would swear we would hear the grandfather clock chime 13 times at 6:30 in the morning. Many of us felt what could be described as a gentle touch, like a family member placing their hand or shoulders. It had weight and pressure, and we would turn to find no one there. This was made even worse when one of us had our back to the wall. There was one occasion when my friend, his older brother and I witnessed what we would later believe to be the ghost of the original owner. This happened when we saw a man ascend the staircase beside me as I went downstairs to use the bathroom, but there were no elderly men in this house, which leaves one to speculate who it could have been. There were also several times when driving up the long driveway, a dark figure would be watching people driving up the house in the third-story window on the north side. Almost every time this happened, no one was home. The eldest daughter complained constantly. She'd at random times in her room hear the sound of someone behind her, sniffing her hair. She would turn, but be alone in the room. Furthermore, she constantly had her door locked due to her brothers constantly bugging her. Twice while watching movies in the living room, we all heard the loud and heavy noise of something moving across the wooden floor of the second floor. Somehow, a near 200-pound wooden bed and frame had moved almost 9 feet across the room, without disturbing the contents of the bed. In my opinion, the second scariest thing happened one night while playing D&D in the living room. At one point, Clarissa, the second oldest daughter of my friend's family, got up to do a mild bit of body acting for a scene. She moved to the bay window and placed her hands on the little seat there. Her character was building up to some sort of loud outburst. She screams to the effect of, "Lord Cravington, I've had enough of you," without warning, when 3 very loud, very sharp bangs come from the window, as if someone was beating their fist on the other side. Seeing it was still light out, we could see there was no one there. This was followed by a voice screaming from the 3rd floor, "Keep it down, you rotten girl." That made us all nope the hell out of there for the night. Finally, there was the door to hell incident. In that 3rd-story suite, we discovered there was a hidden door in the wall. It was a hideaway closet. Behind that door was a 2nd and smaller door. The moment we all discovered it, we were overcome with this utterly massive sensation of dread. We opened it. Inside was a smallish crawl space. The inner walls of the space were covered with claw-like marks as if made with human fingernails. There were darker stains in the wood when we washed it out to get a better look. On the inside of door 2 were weakly carved words that read, "This is the door to hell." To this day, I and anyone there that day constantly have this door appear in our dreams. It appears randomly. Like, imagine you're walking into a classroom of your high school. You open the door in your dream, but instead of your classroom, it's that 3rd-story suite with the door to hell. Each time you see it, you're progressively closer than the last, and a feeling of predatory desire washes over you, like you're the prey. After this, my friend's family decided it would be best to get a Catholic priest, as they were Catholic, to attempt to cleanse the house. But from what I remember, it wasn't successful. And the family wasn't in a financial position to move out for quite a while. They finally got a chance to move out, and shortly after, the house wound up being demolished in the year 2000. The Historical Society had deemed the house to be too dangerous to preserve and too expensive. The repairs needed were excessively expensive, so they deemed it best to demolish it. The lot can be viewed on Google Maps today. From the supernatural and paranormal perspective, the door to hell was studied a few times. The first was around 1927, when they reported more poltergeist-like activities, stating things did turn off and on, doors slammed on their own, and stomping footsteps could be heard. In 1954, some students from OSU went to check it out for themselves, and they reported much of the same. The last and final inspection came around in 1997, when Nick's family asked a group of Portland-based ghost hunters to check it out. They reported some of the more severe events, which included the ghost touches and sense of abject dread from even looking towards the door. I'm glad it's no longer there, and feel great sorrow for the family who suffered at the hands of that crazed man in that tainted location. My parents bought a house built in 1848, Ontario, Canada. I was retrofitting a cabinet built into the wall to accommodate a safe and accidentally uncovered a sealed-up hallway and room. 2 years earlier, my parents had tried to insulate the exterior walls by blowing in fiberglass insulation from the outside. They couldn't figure out why they kept running out of insulation. Well, the hallway had about 3 feet of insulation on it, and it had also spilled into the spare room. Sitting neatly on top of the blown-in insulation was a saucer and a teacup, set as though tea may be in it. It was totally empty though. No insulation ever got in. We took pictures and discovered tons of orbs and some plasma-looking images that looked almost like a winged creature. Seriously strange. My fiancée at the time, now wife, worked at this naturopathic medical clinic in an old farmhouse converted to a doctor's office. The house was built in 1890, or close to that. Big place, full basement. The upstairs attic space was converted into a 2-bedroom apartment that she ended up renting from her boss. Now the place was known to all the staff to be haunted, though no one told me about it. After the fact, I heard all about seeing a little girl at the top of the old stairs all the time. The stairs were now capped, and what used to be the attic prior to it being the apartment. Even without that, the place had some creepy vibes. In the basement is the original 6-foot wide, hand-dug well. Something super off about it. Even more creepy is there is a tunnel that goes from the basement to an old outbuilding about 30 meters away. Right under the yard and all. Bad vibes down there all round. She and I each had dogs, and at this place and nowhere else they would avoid the kitchen and especially the pantry. When I say avoid, we fed them in the kitchen and they would strafe the walls, eat as fast as they could and then leave immediately. Normally my dog is right there in the kitchen, hoping to eat some people food, but not here. At night, every night between about midnight and 3 a.m, it would smell like a combination of burning garbage and rot. If you went outside, the smell would fade within about 10 feet of the structure. Electrical would fail in different parts of the place randomly, then mysteriously return. No breakers or anything tripped, or during an outage either. So my wife gets into an argument with her boss, who now expects her to be a full-time daycare provider for her toddler instead of a medical reception. They argue, she quits, and the doctor says he wants her out by the end of the month. My wife says she will be gone by the end of the week. The end of the week was like 3 days, so she packed up for 2 days and I rented a U-Haul, and Friday evening she, my buddy and I started loading the truck. I eventually sent her to my place to crash, and as she had to work her second job early in the morning, that left me and my buddy to finish moving. It was either full moon or close to. I doubt it has anything to do with this, but what happened was very strange. It was one of those nights where the moon was so bright it left shadows on everything, which is fairly rare and very cool when it happens. Around midnight we took a break and sat on the floor of the now vacant living room. The door outside was on the opposite wall from us, and there were 2 skinny windows on either side of the door, when something caught my eye, and I looked at the window in time to see a light move across it. I didn't say or do anything. My buddy all of a sudden says, "Did you see that?" I asked him what, and he says he saw a light go by in the right window. Outside the door is a deck with stairs going down, but directly across from the door are windows in a huge hedge. No way light came from there. So I say I saw it too, and let him know it was a reflection. I tell him to not freak out. He freaks the hell out anyway. We go back to moving stuff and he doesn't stop acting triggered over it. I tell him to ignore it or it'll get worse, as I lived in a mildly haunted place for a year as a kid, and know reacting is the wrong thing to do. He's on edge, and so far I'm as calm as a clam. My buddy freaks out and says he saw some old woman standing in the pantry as we're walking back inside. I didn't see anything. Still, he's really starting to lose it. Like at this point he's reluctant to even go back inside. We walk back down the steps and smoke a cigarette. He looks down at the ground and exclaims, "There is this little stump from a tree that someone cut down at some point, and it's literally oozing sap out of slow rivulets. The weirdest thing I've ever seen at the time. They are reflecting really well in the moonlight." We go back inside and we're almost done. I check the bedroom. All that's left in her daughter's room is a dresser and a Furby. I swear to God this Furby hasn't been used or turned on in 2 years, and sure as hell, as I'm about to pick it up, its eyes flutter open and it begins making Furby nonsense noises. At this point I'm not keeping my cool all that well, mostly because the entire time there has been this weird feeling building up. At first it was just kind of uncomfortable, but it kept building. At this point it was kind of dread. I didn't know how to explain it, it was just getting much worse more quickly than when it started. I began picking up the Furby nearest the window and threw it out onto the lawn. Go back to packing the truck. Now in a big hurry though. I feel as though something terrible is coming. Almost everything is in the truck now and it's 2:45 a.m. I'm standing in the back of the truck and he's tossing me stuff to stack. All of a sudden, the thing that was coming wasn't coming anymore. It was here. He's facing the truck. I'm looking out the back and I see it. Whatever it was on the other side of the fence, but you could make it out through the gaps in the board. I jumped out of the truck yelling, "We're leaving right now." My buddy stops dumbfounded and asks, "Why?" I'm already almost in the cab when I yell out, "Get in the truck, Chris!" He turns around, looks behind him and sees it too. He sprints into the cab and we leave without even closing the back door. I didn't tell him what I'd seen, but what he said he saw was exactly the same as what I did. A big black shadow with like a bodybuilder body had eaten a cargo truck of steroids and was looking through the fence, and it sort of glowed in its eyes the way coals do. The next day I told the story to my wife, and she let me know that everyone knew it was haunted, and she had seen the lights in the window before too, which is why she said she got curtains to cover them. She said her daughter had been bothered by them the whole time she was there. She talked to me into going back for the patio furniture, though I didn't want to. We pulled up and I swear to God, you could see something pacing in the flower bed in front of the fence. Well, you couldn't see it, just the footprints it was making, and I told her, no, not doing that, get back in the truck, we'll buy you new patio stuff. We drove off, and after a few minutes, I saw it too. I never set foot on the property again, and never will. I can't explain the feeling. When I say dread, that doesn't cover it. The feeling that night wasn't fear of death or some horror. It was something way worse than dying, if that makes sense. Everyone can say this stupid made-up horror stuff, but this isn't it. I believed in ghosts because I had seen them as a kid, and whatever was waiting for us behind that fence was no ghost. I don't know what it was, and honestly, I hope to never find out. Sometime back in the early 90s, my then girlfriend and I lived in a Victorian terraced house. Nothing overtly spooky ever occurred there, apart from the neighbours complaining that someone had been in their house and moved things around while they were away. They were alarmed enough to call the police, and seeing as there was a shared roof space along the terrace, we were briefly questioned, as were the other neighbours. Weirdly, the police asked if there had been any paranormal activity in either of our houses, which we obviously laughed off at the time. A few months later, my girlfriend and I were laying in bed with the lights out. I was on my back with my eyes open, when slowly a luminescent hollow ball faded into view, seemingly made up of lots of very small dim fluorescent rods, like the magnified pictures of bacteria you see. The ball was about 1 meter across and perhaps 1.5 meters above the middle of the bed. It was obvious I was having some kind of pre-sleep hallucination. A few seconds later it faded, and I turned to my girlfriend and said, I just saw a small ball of light floating over the bed. She had seen it too. We lay there shocked. Soon after, another hollow ball appeared, this time made up of dim, fluorescent triangles. It lasted a few seconds and faded away. I think after that, our eyes were tightly shut and heads went under the duvet, but the experience was never repeated, as far as any of us saw. I told this story to somebody once, and they wondered what would have happened if we'd have reached up to this strange object. I used to live in a haunted house. It was a few hundred years old, and in a village that was much older. The oldest house there was built in the 1400s. I was around 5 or 6, and we moved out when I was 11. In the first year, I was an extension of the house. My bedroom was over next door's kitchen, if that makes sense, and my bedroom door was fine, on the hinges, but kept being pushed open. It couldn't physically open without the handle being pushed down, so there was no explanation as to how this happened. I switched rooms, so me and my sister were in the room over our house. Mirrors would flip out of desks, and other things would fall over randomly with no explanation as to how. Footsteps would be heard from upstairs, and there was always a weird atmosphere too, like you knew something was there. If my whole family didn't experience the same thing, then I wouldn't have believed it. We always heard the name Walter being said. In primary school, one of my friend's granddads used to live in our village growing up. He asked which house we lived in, and when he said, "Oh, that was Walter's house." That kind of set in stone for us that something was seriously up. Although it never hurt us, I think it was just having fun. My younger sister made claims of a woman who played with her teddies when she was around 2, and my mum saw a young boy sitting on our steps, and she definitely wouldn't make that up. The atmosphere was pretty scary. When a house is haunted, and I go in, I can feel it now, if that makes sense. I was a paranormal investigator, sat up in an old house. There were 5 of us sitting in the addition of the first floor. where the last owner took her last breath. We were listening to the history when from above we heard it, footsteps walking back and forth, the lights swinging overhead with force. All 5 of us were in this room, and no one else was there. It was bizarre. We decided to head upstairs but left a bell on the bed, letting the supposed ghost know if she wanted us that she could ring the bell. As we headed up the very narrow and steep steps to the 2nd story, what did we hear? The bell. We stood there all in the stairway deciding either to go up or go down. We didn't want to split up because then any footsteps above or below had to be discounted, as it could easily be us. We decided to check on the bell and then go up. There were other things that happened in that house. Some people claimed to have been touched or felt hands on them. We would hear scratches or whispers and footprints above us if on the 1st floor, or below us if on the 2nd story. On the 2nd story, I did do an investigation by myself while everyone was outside, and I wanted pictures but nothing happened. I went back here 2 times and got some EVPs, but the bell was the craziest thing from that location. The 2nd location will be called the theatre. This was the last investigation I had with this paranormal group before the tragedy happened. Car accident not related to anything paranormal, in which we lost 50% of the group. This theatre still haunts my dreams. Something yanked on my necklace and the boiler almost blew up. My voice recorder suddenly went off without me touching it, not once but 3 times, the last time without batteries in it. I got separated from the others in the basement tunnels and found myself facing a shadow of a person standing before me. When leaving, I suddenly felt very ill and had to pull over and throw up as I left the city. I got suddenly blurry. There was an overall sense of dread, like if I didn't get out, something was going to happen. Back at home, my neck had scratches from where my necklace was pulled and my arm was bruised. I think spirits can feast on vulnerability, and during the theatre investigation, I was very vulnerable due to an encounter with a man as I was walking from my car to the theatre. So I think that shook me so much I opened myself to paranormal, and the paranormal loves to mess with weak individuals, so it chose me to mess with. At the first location, I wasn't stressed out at all, and able to keep my mental health strong, and therefore the paranormal chose to focus on those who had opened and vulnerable minds. I still try to go on as many paranormal investigations that I can get my hands onto. I managed to be a part of a non-taped investigation with the ghost hunters in Kentucky, went on ghost tours in London and Hawaii and Poland, and I plan on visiting Waverly Hills and other haunted hotspots, but I'll never go back to that theatre, even for $1 million. I experienced what I had to offer, and I feel satisfied there is no further business I have with that place. However, with the first location, I feel we have become good acquaintances and can't wait for my next visit. I feel like I haven't experienced anything that place has to offer, so until I do, I don't mind dropping in and saying hi. I have this friend who her and her mum are very witchy-like. Her mum is one scary woman. They had this extremely big and old expensive house. I went and stayed with them one summer when I was about 17. We get there and the house is wonderful. They are bringing us through all the rooms and get to one place where they tell us to never open. Fast forward a week, no one's gone in. But all the bathrooms in the house are being used, except for the one that's in this room. So I think nothing of it. Go into the bathroom and take a leak. Now when I tell you I felt this absolutely chilling thing grab my shoulder, it was big. It felt like fingers down the front of my chest, while it's sitting on my shoulder. I freeze, and after what seemed like forever I heard my name, clicked back to reality, finished my business and walked out. I found out I was there for over 40 minutes. Fast forward a few more days and I go and stand in the pool at around 11:30 at night. I'm standing in the pool with my phone when it happens. Something grabs my shoulder and I freeze. I drop my phone straight in the water and apparently stood there for over 2 hours until someone found me. To this day, being nearly 30, I still, to this day, experience this strange sensation about twice a year. But I don't lose hours this time, merely minutes, and I still find it creepy. I'm a 19-year-old female. I live in a small town in South Carolina. I've lived here my whole life in the same house, which was built in 1971. My father bought it with his ex-wife and my mum. His current wife moved in 2001, and I was born in 2002. I'll start at the beginning, but I will mention that I do have a rather messed up memory. For as long as I've been alive, there have been footsteps in the attic. I've always tried to rationalize it, just thinking this is an old house. It's bound to make noise. But a few months ago I heard bells jingling in the attic, like our Christmas decorations. It was above the bathroom, and the footsteps are usually above my room, which is right next door. I told my dad about it, and he went to check for animals, but couldn't find any. Couldn't even find a place where they have gotten in. He told me I was hearing things and probably needed to go to bed, so I did. Then I started hearing what I could only describe as footsteps coming from inside the wall. My mum heard it too. So did our cats. At one point it was behind our coffee maker, and we were both standing there scared that it was a mouse or something. Our cat Katniss was desperately trying to find it but could not. My mum told my dad this time, and an exterminator came out but couldn't find anything either. The noise persisted. Then I heard noises coming from the faucet in the bathtub. It sounded like someone was trying to force the faucet out of its place. I told my dad again, thinking there was a problem with the pipes. He found nothing. The footsteps and the wall noises are continuous, but seem to get louder at night. I don't know if it's just because the house is quiet at night, or if it sounds louder or what. I should mention that our attic is very short and hot. It's not possible for a grown person to stand upright, so no, we don't have someone living there, and my dad checked around and found nothing. Then it began messing with our dogs. The thing scared the hell out of our oldest dog, Amber, twice. None of the other dogs did this, just her, and she did it twice. No knocking on the door that she was lying in front of, which, even if it was there, she wouldn't be afraid of. She'd just start barking her head off. The last thing it does to our dogs is the hardest to talk about. Bouncy is a beagle mix and quite large. The first time was the night before my first day of school. I can't remember which year it was, but it was in at least the last 4 years. I remember I had a coconut hair mask on, and I had just gotten out of the shower, so I wasn't dressed yet, just in a towel, and all of a sudden, I hear snarling and barking, and my mum screaming her head off. I go in there, and we have to physically pry them off each other. Little Bit was injured, but not bad enough to go to the vet, so we just separated them, and they eventually got over it. But they still ended up fighting several more times. I've gotten injured trying to stop them, although I know they didn't mean to hurt me. I remember one time my dad just straight picked up Little Bit, and Bounce was attached to her throat and was also in the air. Eventually they stopped, until a few months ago. It was 3 a.m. I remember very vividly because I was trying to sleep, but was on the phone, and my mum called me out of my room. What could you possibly want? I thought. It's 3 a.m. Her yell was urgent though, so I didn't even bother putting on my shorts. I just ran to the kitchen. She screamed that they were fighting again and needed help. I ran out there with a flashlight, not even bothering to put shoes or pants on, and had to pry them apart by myself because my mum didn't even move from the back porch. At one point, I even hit Bounce in the back with a flashlight because she just wouldn't stop, and I couldn't separate them. I was screaming for my mum, and I'm surprised I didn't awake the neighbors with how much noise was happening. It's terrifying, seeing two animals you love dearly trying to kill each other. I eventually got them apart and held Little Bit back. Oh, by the way, earlier the other day Bouncy had come inside with blood on her butt, but we didn't know from what. My mum just called Bounce up to the porch and let her in, and Little Bit was standing there. And when I tell you that I've never seen her look like that, it looked like she'd reverted to, I don't know, primal instinct. It's like her personality and sweetness just drained from her, and I was reminded that day that she was an animal. My mum woke up my dad, and he had the audacity to be inconvenienced. I don't have the best parents, but that's another story. My mum decided that this was the last straw, and one of them needed to go, so we ended up taking Little Bit to the SPCA. But don't worry, we know she was adopted and is fine now. This is just the prelude. The first experience I remember was actually with a friend. I was in middle school, so around 4 to 7. I would go with my friend, this girl Kaylee. She lived down the street and would often come over to my house after school and would sometimes stay for dinner before walking back home. That day was one of them. We had been in my bedroom that I shared with my older sister Tori. Not sure where she was, but she wasn't in the room. My grandparents had this bench filled with toys that they needed to get rid of because we were older and no longer used it, so we were allowed to pick up some stuff and brought those things along with the bench home. One of the things I picked out was a Scooby-Doo stuffed animal. Apparently it was called the Fright Night Scooby stuffed animal. A flashlight was attached to his hand, and whenever you turned it on, there would be a ghost shadow on the light, and he would say something like, "Cover my eyes, too scary," in his iconic Scooby voice. At the time, it was turned off with no batteries and was purely decorative. It had been sitting on the floor in front of my sister's bed, which is on the other side of the room on the door. Me and Kaylee were called for dinner, so I let her walk out of the room before turning off the lights. And I kid you not, this thing goes, "Turn the lights back on, too scary," at the exact same time. Me and Kaylee run out the room. I didn't even shut the door and was screaming about how it just spoke. My parents don't believe me, of course, so we ate. Kaylee went home and I ripped the wires out of that thing and threw it away. My sister moved out when I was 11. I'm 19 now and have our room to myself. It's a strange shape. It's a box, but they didn't finish one wall, so there's a little bump out area. For the longest time, my bed was in that little nook. We had bunk beds that were in the nook. Then we had custom beds built by my dad that were like loft beds, and mine was in the corner. Now I have a proper bed that's too big for it, so I have a desk there with my makeup. The bedroom door is next to where the wall of that desk is on, if that makes sense. The door is across from the desk through my closet. And one day I was sitting there doing my makeup when from the corner of my eye I see a dark figure. I immediately jump thinking it's my mum who had snuck into my room without me noticing, but my door is squeaky, so there's no way I wouldn't have heard. I slowly turn around and then lean around the corner. The door is closed. No one else was in the room. I'm looking around, startled at what the hell I just saw. As I'm scanning the room, I see a black hand come from the wall on the floor directly in front of the door. It had a piece of paper on the floor, so I figured it just blew up and saw the shadow. So I returned to do my makeup. I take some pictures, take it off, and sit back down on my bed, which is across from my desk in the corner of the room. Then I noticed the paper moved in time, but it didn't explain what I saw standing in the middle of the room. Now for the latest thing. I have a weird sleeping schedule, as I'm unemployed and not going to school. Yesterday I woke up at 2 a.m. My dad left for work at 4 a.m. as always, and my mum went to bed around 3 a.m, so I had the house to myself. I woke up, had some leftovers, got something out of the cabinet but left it open because I knew I had to put the thing back, so what's the point? Everything is squeaky, even the cabinets, and I'm standing at the microwave, ironically right next to the coffee machine, and turn around to put it back, and the cabinet is now shut. Now I know I have a bad memory, but I never close them. I don't unless they're low to the ground where my cats can get in. So how did it close? And I would have heard it if I'd have closed it. While I'm eating, my mum screams for me and sounds absolutely terrified. I thought she got mad at me because I accidentally woke her up, so I yelled back, "What?" She says she heard a noise in her room, so I just left my room, and my mum said something in the bathroom scared our young cat Ivy, and she came running out of the bathroom, so that's great. I hate the bathroom, stuff always happens there. She yells at me, and she doesn't respond, so I open my door and see my mum sitting up in her bed, sobbing. She says she heard a female voice, and it sounded like it was at the foot of her bed. I assume someone broke into our house. I go into her room, shut the door, leaving it a crack open, grab her phone and ask if we should call the police. She says no, so I check the house. I knew I had let the dogs out earlier, but I was certain I locked the doors after letting them back in. I turned on the flashlight on her phone and walked around, checking the front and back door, and they were both locked. I didn't bother checking the window, because our house is pretty impossible to break into, so I knew no one else was in our house. She's still sobbing when I get back to her room. She says that it was feminine, but didn't sound like words, just mumbling. 2 syllables. All of my family members have 2-syllable word names, so it might have been a name. I asked her about sleep paralysis, and she said that she could move and the voice sounded clear. I told her about the cabinet, because I remember it happened literally less than an hour before. She didn't say anything about it. She didn't go back to bed until my dad got home at 2 p.m. Bounce and Zoe were laying on the floor in front of the bed, and didn't react to anything at all. Amber was laying next to my mum, and was asleep when I was talking to her. Katniss and Ivy were laying on the couch in the living room, and none of them reacted either. I don't know if she saw anything, but there have been some things there, but my mum is pretty blind without her glasses. She has bifocals and it was dark, but this is really starting to freak me out. My cats just sit and stare at the corner of the living room that just happens to connect to my mum's room. I thought for the longest time it was the old man next door. The shadow person that I saw didn't feel feminine, but it didn't also feel threatening. I've woken up with bruises in random spots, and while I do move around a lot, my mum would hear it if I hit a wall, and I have no clue what to do. This, along with a lot of the stuff that happened with my friend in the forest that's around our neighborhood, is really getting to me. I don't even wholly believe in this, but what else could it be? How do you imagine a sound? We're not even close to being religious. And I'm not really looking for tips, I just needed to share this with someone who had believed me. When I told my parents about the shadow person, they straight up laughed. I can't even imagine what my dad will say to my mum. And I saw her crying. She looked so scared. She called me because she thought someone might be in our house. Like that's how sure she is she heard it. I'm honestly so sick of this house. I just want to leave it and this town behind. As a child, I'd spend weekends at my dad's house, which was old, and said to be haunted by a playful girl called Esther. For other people, doors would shut themselves, lights would turn on and off, and doorbells would ring in the middle of the night. My siblings would even have conversations with Esther. Understanding this as a 6-year-old absolutely terrified me. Pretty soon I had my own experiences, but they were less friendly. I'd hear breathing in the dark. I'd stop breathing to listen, and it was much closer to me than my stepbrother in the bunk above. I'd wake up to see the imprint of someone sitting on my bed. Reading other stories of sleep paralysis sounds familiar to mine, but one night, I challenged my night terror. I had 2 die-cast race cars on my dresser, both hoods opened of the car, but one didn't stay up very well. I said out loud, "If you're here, shut the hood when I go to bed," and opened the hood of the car that had the better functioning hood. I stared at it to make sure that it was up and stayed up. I hit the lights, and as soon as I did so, I heard slam. I turned the lights on and the hood was closed. I ran downstairs and my stepmother said I looked as white as a sheet, like I'd seen a ghost. She and my dad checked it out and came to the conclusion that it must have just shut by itself. The weirdness continued until the day we moved out, but I still have trouble believing it myself, or typing it out for that matter, and still get chills just remembering it. A priest once told me he went to a house because it was infested. As soon as he entered, he was greeted by the owner of the apartment, who immediately started to tell him about the presence. She said it was a child spirit who would sometimes either scare her or when she was asleep hug her legs. As a confirm, shortly after she had ended her narration, they heard the door moving. There was no one inside the apartment but them. The priest called his superiors, and they came over in an attempt to banish whatever was there, trying to use holy water on the bedroom wall, and allegedly the pictures hung on the wall moved as they did so, in order to avoid contact with the liquid. When everything was finished, the priest went on to investigate the situation, and allegedly after some time discovered that a satanic rite was made in this area before the construction of the building.